Welcome to another Product Wisdom podcast. Today, a legend is with us, Peter Rojas. We've been talking about Cusco, Machu Picchu, and Peru. Peter is originally from there. He
Well,
has a
my family is. My father was born there. I was born in the U.S., but I have dual citizenship.
right, yeah. From there is kind of subjective. And theoretically, I'm from Ireland and France and England, but I was born in Montreal. He is working at Meta currently, interim product lead, personal communication messenger, and he has quite the colorful background. I mean, it's not his first stint. So founder Gizmodo, founder at Engadget, and editor in chief. So we're gonna talk about that today. Joystick, RCRD. I don't know about that one. You'll tell me
Oh,
about it.
record label is a music startup that I worked on for a few years. And the one thing I did that didn't work out in terms of
Right.
start.
And we're gonna cover that today because we're gonna do two rounds out of this. This is gonna be the first one about Peter's background. The second one will be a bit more about product. GDGT, which is another interesting one. Then he went at AOL, BetaWorks Ventures, which I certainly know, and finally Meta to this day, working with Zuck. Not directly, but yeah, you probably know the guy. I really love Zuck, by the way, what he's onto nowadays with the MMA, the running, the 5K under 20 minutes. That was impressive. Love the guy. Peter, can you introduce yourself? Tell us a bit more about your background.
Yeah, well, and again, thank you for having me on. And you did a pretty good job, I think, running down a lot of the things that I've done over the past 20 years or so. So I don't necessarily have like a succinct way to describe exactly like what I've done, but I'd say that been lucky enough to have a career where I started off actually as a journalist and blogger and kind of morphed into a founder, almost an accidental founder, to be honest. Never saw myself on that path. But when I couldn't find a job and no one would hire me, I ended up sort of taking matters into my own hands, and and then have been really fortunate to have been able to like build a bunch of stuff which people have loved. But ultimately, the thing that has really powered me over the past 25 years now or so of my career is being just really excited about where technology is taking us and how it is enabling new ways for us to live, work, and play, right? And how, for me, looking at what's coming next, what are the next wave of technologies and what new forms of life, work, play, what kinds of new kinds of behaviors are they going to unlock? And so really trying to dig in and understand like what's coming around the corner and what new kinds of experiences, products, whatever you want to call them, it's going to enable. That's really been at the heart of my career, whether that's been as a journalist, as a blogger, as a founder, as a VC, as a builder. It's always been that common thread of being excited about trying to figure out what's coming next and how can it enable us to do things that we didn't do before.
So you've probably been on another podcast discussing about your past. So I don't want necessarily to discuss about Gizmodo and Engadget, two legendary magazines that I religiously read pretty much every week back in these days. You've also founded a couple of startups and invested in fascinating startups like Hugging Faces, recently through BetaWorks. What brought you at Meta? It's like from CEO and founder to corporate, quote unquote. Like that is quite surprising to me.
Yeah, it wasn't a move that I had expected to make, and there's sort of an expression that VC is a one-way door, right? That once you start doing VC, that you tend not to going back to being a founder, or going back to being an operator. And it's one reason why I encourage people not to be a VC at the beginning of their career, that it's really the time to take a risk and work at a startup or be a startup founder, because you really have that opportunity when you're young. And when you get to be older and have kids and mortgages and responsibilities and things like that, it's a little harder to feel comfortable with the level of risk that you need to take. Not that there aren't amazing older founders, right? And obviously there's data that suggests that older founders are more successful than younger ones, but I think that it tends to be easier when you're younger to do those things. And I'm glad I did those things when I was younger. The opportunity with Meta was actually not with Messenger, where I am right now, but was to be head of product for the new product experimentation group. And that was an organization. It was a top level product organization at Meta. And we were charged with essentially incubating entirely new 0 to 1 standalone products with the goal of getting to hundreds of millions, if not billions of users over the course of like several years. And so given that I had run a similar kind of experimental product group at AOL called Alpha, the fact that I had been a VC at BetaWorks, which BetaWorks that started as a studio, morphed into a venture fund, but also still ran an accelerator. And I had run accelerators. I'd been a founder myself. And so I think the opportunity to really focus in on the part of all of being a VC that I love most, which was working with founders and helping them craft and bring their ideas to life, that I loved. I didn't love trying to raise money from LPs, which is, I hate to say it, but unless you are a very junior partner at a very big fund, you spend a lot of time raising money yourself. And BetaWorks was our first fund was 50 million. The second one is about the same, and 3 partners. And so we raised the money, right? And you end up spending, it was easily a third of my time going out and talking to LPs and spending time with them and trying to convince them to write checks. And as much as I enjoyed having those conversations and spending time with LPs, obviously like the thing that really animates me is the product stuff and like helping people build. And so the opportunity with Meta was, let's go and you can go and focus in on the part that you love and not have to worry about the rest of it. And so that was like attractive. And obviously they made it worth my while. And so I really treasure the year and a half that I had leading NPE and helping us, and got to work with amazing founders. Really proud of the work that we did. But it's very bittersweet that we weren't able to continue it given the company's focus on efficiency this year. But I'm glad that I'm able to do some of this work at Messenger and on the top of my other duties. But I also think it's really healthy to be able to adapt and understand the needs of bigger organizations and bigger teams. And so I'm enjoying the challenge of learning how to scale my skill set to a product with almost 2 billion monthly users.
And how crazy is that? 2 billion users, from journalist to founder to CEO and slash CEO to VC and now to product. It's like a 4 nice seasons. I think you'd be in the hotter one right now, because product is where the world is headed right now. Me, I started in sales, and every day I'm becoming more product led. Product led growth is the team right now. I think you're on the right seat, and your experience is just fascinating. But it's also like, if Zuck would be making a bet on you there, like, is okay, he's been a VC, he's been a founder, can he operate in a team? How hard has it been for you to be this sort of pirate with like ultimate liberty, and now working in a corporations with rules and leading a team that you don't necessarily get to recruit?
Yeah, it's definitely, it's a transition, right? And I think that the role at NPE was unlike being a product leader at the rest of the company, right? It was more like being a VC than the work I do now. So I had a little bit of a transition where I was able to get used to some of the parts of Meta, but being siloed and being maybe shielded from a lot of the typical processes that we have here. And so it's definitely been a little bit of an adjustment and learning, how do you have to communicate differently? How do you reconcile not just, coordinating with teams across Messenger, but there's something I'm working on right now, which unfortunately I can't share much about, but involves coordinating with Facebook, a team on Facebook. And so these are big, complex organizations. They're very well run, and Meta has really great people. I mean, it's very rare do you meet someone here that isn't, wouldn't be a superstar anyplace else, right?
Right.
And so the bar is very high. And so I've been fortunate that like part of what I can bring to the table is, look, I haven't been a product manager for 10 years, right? And I meet people here who've been 10, 12 years sometimes here. And those people are phenomenal. I mean, just in terms of their ability to execute and run a process and manage large teams, they are just world class. I mean, I definitely am in awe of their expertise and their ability to perform at that level. For me, it's what I the strength that I bring to the table is, well, how do we continue to be innovative and not get stuck in the process at a place like this? How do we think about not just incrementalism, right? Which is important. And frankly, this is how the business works, is how can we incrementally increase our metrics and revenue and things like that, quarter over quarter, year over year. But how do we think about like the taking bigger swings, different risks? How do we calibrate risk in an environment like that? So I kind of recognize that as much as part of my job is to be on the product leadership at Messenger and help run the org and manage the sets of product processes that we have, that I have something unique or at least rare here.
Right.
And that I think that bringing that to the table is also really important, just in the way that like other product leaders here bring some other things to the table.
Super important, because big orgs, they tend to stagnate, and the worst nightmare of the CEO of a company, especially when the CEO is its founder, which is very, very unique in Zuck's case, is to see people being or getting lost in SOPs basically, and not producing anything, not taking any risks because they've been taught, or that's the culture in the company. And hopefully it's not in Meta's DNA. I don't think it is. And yes, you have amazing talent, probably one of the best talent in the world. So I think that is definitely a weapon of some sort. Meta has kind of suffered with their bets on VR. Now they're going all in with AI. What do you think about that bet, and how will that be a core focus of yours in your division?
So this is something that I probably can't share anything about. Let's put it this way. There are things that you probably have maybe read in the news about work that is being done, that some of which relates to Messenger. There's nothing that I can comment on right now, unfortunately, but I would say that there may be news soon that will be related to that.
And regarding the product itself, I'm a daily user of Messenger. It's an amazing product. Let's face it, you can instant message folks. There's the GIFs, there's the calls that are super cool. You can have this huge emoji as your face.
Yeah.
It's really entertaining, to say the least, and a bunch of people use it as a de facto tool to communicate with their family. That has especially accelerated throughout COVID. iMessage has a large market share there. There's the old Skype. Yep. I think Skype is like losing a lot of market share, and there's newcomers like Discord. How do you keep up with these guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a challenge, right? I think that people have a lot of options for messaging, right? Not just, there's obviously iMessage. There's also, if you're Android, you have an SMS app on your phone. A lot of that's converting to RCS for default, so that you'll get a richer, more iMessage-like experience. Obviously, there's Signal, there's Telegram. Even within Meta, there's WhatsApp, which is another option for people. And one of the things that like I have found personally is that people tend to use a mix of applications. There usually isn't one thing that very few people have just one messaging app which they use. They usually have like a number of them. And even if it's to say, let's just speak hypothetically, right? I use iMessage on my phone because it's there, but I'm on Discord because I play games, and like that's how I connect with my squad, right? For one example. And I think that, like, again, I have to be really careful about what I can say publicly about Messenger strategy. I just want to make sure I don't say something I'm not supposed to say. But you can imagine that having a messaging product which is integrated into these big existing platforms like Facebook and Instagram Direct is actually part of my org. So it's the same infrastructure, right? And so one of the things that we think a lot about is how can we make the experience of messaging someone that's in your network better, right? That we can make it richer, more expressive, something that is more enjoyable. There's less friction. And so I think that like the fact that we have so much competition is one reason why we have to fight so hard to be something that people choose to use, and that they get value from, even recognizing, right, that people are probably going to mix and match different messaging products into their lives in different ways. And that's okay. That's not it. Just even if people use Instagram, that doesn't mean that they don't use TikTok or YouTube or other products, right? That's just the reality of this stuff. And I think ultimately for the kind of product work that we're doing, being able to constantly challenge ourselves to create the best experience we can is the bar that we set. And one of the things that I love about the people that I get to work with here is that there's a real there's a constant sense of like, how can we do more? How can we be better? How
Right.
can we raise the bar, so to speak? There's not like there's nobody who's complacent
Right.
here.
So Peter's not allowed to talk, too much about the product, but let me give you a couple of hints here. And I'm not an insider, but I get good hints, generally speaking. Well, you just have to look at what's happening with ChatGPT right now to probably see the next announcements here. It will be something along these lines. Zuck has been obsessed with having an AI assistant since 5-10 years or so. I remember that was one of his life goals. So I'm probably expecting that from you and your team, Peter. And just a small parenthesis here for folks. Peter is the guy behind the DMs, like straight up. So I think that
Well,
would be the headline of the video here.
I it is a big complex organization, and I play my part, but like I want to make, like, there are a lot of people that go into making that experience
Yeah,
work.
yeah. This is for the headlines.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I have two questions that might be relevant here that you may be able to speak about, I'm pretty sure. So how does it feel to be responsible to 2 billion folks, to know that the product you're working on will be deployed to 2 billion people?
Yeah, I mean, it can be a little bit intimidating at times, because you realize that like so many people rely on Messenger. They want to pick up their phone and have it just work, right? And so they don't want to have their, just at a baseline, right? Like they if it's frustrating or it crashes or whatever. And so we obviously talk a lot about how can we improve just the basic, making sure that like the basics are met. Like that's something that is a priority, right? Like quality, reliability. We're uh, we also take really seriously the fact that it's a product used all around the world, right? And that different markets, different users have different needs, right? Like someone in India might use Messenger very differently than someone in the US and might fit into their life. There are countries where Messenger is basically the predominant messaging product, and there are other areas where it's not, right? And I think that recognizing that we are serving a global audience, and that we have to you can't necessarily just extrapolate from your own experience, right? Being in the US, most of us and we use Messenger on like the always on the best phones, right? And things like that. And that, like, that is an experience that everybody has, right? Like a lot of people have maybe a $100 Android phone that they got that's already 3-4 years old, right? And so we have to think about like kind of the challenge of, I think, stepping outside yourself is a really core part of building a product, right? You have to be able to develop this empathy for the user, and the empathy. And when you have as many users as we do, you have to figure out how to, have empathy for billions of users, so to speak, like, and really challenge yourself. And so we have amazing user research teams that are constantly sort of like talking to users, like trying to understand what they like, what they don't like, how they use things, looking for future opportunities. Amazing like data science teams that are looking at the analytics and like patterns of usage and trying to figure out like why is something here different than this other place. And so as much as we use like data and research to inform, I think if you lack that ability to sort of step outside of yourself a little bit and realize that not everybody is going to be the same as you, not everyone's going to have the same perspective or background, and that you have to approach it with a lot of humility and empathy. And it's not easy, because it's one thing to say, have empathy, but you have to, it's like a muscle. You have to exercise it a lot.
Very hard.
And I have to remind myself all the time about this. One of the examples I love from my BetaWorks days is there was a startup that we were looking at for investment. I don't think we invested in them ultimately, but one of the things that the founder told us was they were building a it was like an app for helping kids with their homework. And we were looking at it. I was like, I kind of curious about some of the design decisions you made. And he said, a lot of our users, they're they're like they're teenagers. They got a hand-me-down phone. The battery sucks. So they're running the device with the screen brightness almost all the way down so they can keep the battery alive. And so we had to design the app with like that in mind, not someone with the screen brightness all the way up, but someone with the brightness all the way down. And so he's like, look, you have the fanciest iPhone. I mean, like you're a VC, like you get the new iPhone every year. These are people who are like, they have like a 6-year-old phone and they might have. And so I think that like trying to be mindful of that stuff, it's hard because there's so many blind spots. And so one of the things that like I constantly try to do as someone who builds things and someone who's like just, or as a VC is like, what are my blind spots? What are the things I'm not thinking about? And I hate it when I mean, I hate it when there's something I don't catch. But one of the things that like when I was doing NPE, we had an office in Nigeria and we were building apps for West Africa, which I loved that we were doing that. We were building some really cool stuff. And I met with one of the researchers. He was in San Francisco to do meetings. And he said, how can I like do my job better for you? And I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to surprise me. Like I already know, like I read the same news sites, like all that stuff. Like I know tech is big in Africa. Like I know that stuff. I want you to surprise me with what people are doing. Like show me something that I don't know about how people are using mobile apps in Nigeria, like that kind of stuff. Like I just love to be surprised. And it's tough because like it means that there's something I missed, but there's like something really joyful in like being like, wow, like I miss this. And like as much as I spend time every single day reading, learning, trying to keep up with things. I'm sure you're the same. And when I miss something important, it like you have that initial like, oh, like how did I miss this? But then like when you realize it that there was something like special that like you didn't catch and you're now aware of it, it's like a gift in a way.
Yeah, it's like an aha moment. So really
Yeah.
love your perspective there. And especially in your case, you've been like hyper successful. So sometimes coming down, and I don't consider myself to be successful yet, but I consider myself to be on some type of cloud. And it's important to come down of there and live people's life. One of my side projects this year here in Oaxaca, Mexico, is to interview people in the streets, make mini documentaries like the Humans of New York, I believe it was
Yeah. Oh
called.
yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That Tumblr. Yeah. I read it. Yeah.
yeah, that was pretty cool. And just to discover their lives and follow them around, maybe give them a couple of pesos at the end and just know about their life so I can understand it better. That's super important. I have one last question for you. And by the way, I remember the days of like Facebook splitting out the messenger app and like the
Yeah.
commotion that caused. Like everyone was angry. And talking about that, Facebook was under the spotlight, not for the good reasons with the privacy and the Cambridge stuff.
Yeah.
I think that Zuck is doing way better now. Well, at least from my standpoint, me, I've always been behind him because I'm a founder too and a CEO. But how do you deal with the privacy concerns most folks are having more and more in the AI age nowadays?
Yeah. So here's what I'll say. And this is something that I was really happy to see when I joined Meta is that user privacy is taken very, very seriously. And I can say, I think I can share this, but like one of the biggest actually challenges for us building new things at NPE was that we were often doing things that other parts of the company hadn't already encountered with respect to like user data and things like that. And so there was a lot of process. It slowed us down actually a lot. But the fact that like the company was very careful and set up the processes to like protect user privacy, to make sure data was safeguarded, to make sure that like stuff is like when we shut down NPE, like we had to make sure that we deleted all user data, fully compliant, like all this stuff. And it's taken very, very seriously, right? I think there's I say there's a broader question around AI and user data that is not just a meta question, right? I think there's a question around LLMs being trained on publicly available
Right.
data, whether how that should work. And I actually went through, I'm trying to remember, I think it was the chat GPT, I think it was GPT 3.5, where they showed, I'm trying to remember which one it was, where it listed what had been like sites had been indexed.
Right.
And so I checked to see like Engadget and Gizmodo both in like the top 100, I think,
Oh,
there, or definitely like high up, and kind of realizing like, well, everything I wrote, and I think I wrote for Engadget, I must have written, well, let's put it this way, in the first 15 months of Engadget, I wrote 5,000 posts.
holy moly.
Yeah. So I was very, very busy, sometimes as many as like 25, 30 a day. Because as a founder and I wanted to win, right? And so I was very, very, I work
My
constantly. Not that I don't
God,
work a
man.
lot now, but like, is, when you're a founder, it's always different. But so the point is, all of that writing is now in an LLM somewhere, right? It's now the vector space of an LLM, right?
You're part of it. Peter's part of it.
I'm part of it, but so is most other things that were posted publicly, right? And I think there's a question around, would I have thought differently about a lot of things writing Engadget if I thought, hey, in 15, 20 years or whatever, it's going to be part of this like AI. I don't know how I would feel about it, right? I don't know how I would think about it. So I think there's like a legitimate concern of like, if I'm an artist, should I be able to opt out? I'm being trained. On the other hand, and this is something that I think is, because my background is actually in critical theory. I have a master's in English. All language, every thought that we have that is expressed in language is using words that we learned from someone else,
Right.
right? So there's no like, every word that you write, every word on this screen right now is like a word that, like, I guess maybe except for like podpire, which you maybe made up, but I'm saying like,
Podcast Empire.
yeah, but like but like these are words. All words is like all our everything we write, everything we say is a remix, so to speak,
Right.
of the language and culture that we've absorbed. And I don't
Yes.
mean that to trivialize or dismiss the risks of AI, but I think that like, in context, a lot of this stuff is one of the things I love about technology and is that it brings our two values that we have into conflict, right? On one hand, with AI, it's like we do want to be able to work off of let's say like the knowledge and cultural heritage, right? And be able to you wouldn't want to say to an artist, you can't be inspired by any other work from the past. You can't say that to a musician. You can't say that to a writer. You couldn't say to a writer, you can't use words that other people have said in the past. You wouldn't be able to express yourself. So, but on the other hand, like we don't want to take away the agency of people to like
Right.
control,
Want to give them something back because they worked for it. We still live in a capitalist world, but I am not for copyrights and trademarks because, yeah, we were built on the back of giants. Talking about the giant, Meta is one. Well, I owned various Facebook ads agencies 7 years ago. So I was very much building on Zuck's back. And thank you
I mean,
guys
I
for
think
that.
that like, look, I mean, I think that like society is a set of systems, right? And we have at the base infrastructure, right? And on top of it's like it's layers, right? And I think that one of the things that is complex about, and that new technologies do, is it brings values into conflict, right? I think and this happens like all the time, right? Like just simply the internet created a free speech platform for everyone, right? But on the other hand, free speech can be used to harass, it can be used to misinform, it can be used to threaten. Like there are all sorts of things. And so we have this conflict, we have this value on one hand, free speech, this other value, right, of like, we don't want people to be unsafe, right? And
It just accelerates the whole thing. It's just like the spear, right, that we invented, or standing on our legs. Well, we could walk faster and hunt faster, get what we want faster. So it just expands everything. And the question is like, is our society ready for that? Are we psychologically ready for that acceleration when a lot of people can't even keep up?
yeah, I mean, what it means is that like, I think as a society, I wish we had bigger conversations about what we value and what we want, right? I think that like when we talk about AI and we talk about the risks and dangers of AI, I wish the conversation we were having was, what kind of world do we want to have? Let's have that conversation. Let's talk about what kind of world do we want to have, and can AI help us get there? And if it can, how can we maybe mitigate some of the things we don't want, right? Let's talk about like climate change, right? Like we don't want global warming, right? We want to have a clean environment for our children. And I think I have 3 kids, and I think a lot about the world that we leave them, right? And I think having that conversation, rather than we sometimes get stuck, I think, in the like, we get stuck inside of this level of like, the tech does X or the tech does Y, rather than, well, what do we want? And how does technology get us there?
Well,
And
basic psychological mechanism and biochemistry, it's like cortisol being injected. I think people are still at the level of not knowing how to talk and debate things, and debate not to that Charles is more right than Peter, but can Charles learn from Peter? Can Peter learn from Charles? I think that's how people should view these conversations. And if we don't teach people how to talk that way, talk productively, I call it that way, and not like be in that fight or flight, I think that would be the change, because people need to realize we're all on the same boat. We're kind of this society on the same boat. And yeah, if I'm going to put my tent there on this boat, well, let's hope that I don't put it in the way of everyone else. And that people are part of this ecosystem, this society since forever. And I think, yeah, we need to make concessions here, because I don't necessarily want the same world as you do, but we live on the same planet for now. And
exactly,
most importantly, make it win-win, right?
Yeah, because I think there's like a set of things that we can agree on. Like I always sort of make the joke of people say, I hate socialism. Like this is an example, right? And like I'm as capitalist as you. I was a venture capitalist, right? Like I found, right? And I say, well, are you against schools, like public schools? They're like, no. I love public schools. I'm like, well, are you against having a standing army to protect us? They're like, no, of course not. I love the military, pro defense. And I'm like, well, at the end of the day, the conversation is about what do we want to have as a society that we all agree are things that we should want. And so to me, the conversation is more around what are the things that we think everyone in society should have access to, and what are the things that are not, right? And I know we're way off topic now, but like to me, those are more interesting conversations, right? And so like that, to me, that's the more interesting conversation about tech, which is to say, what do we want? What things do we collectively want as a society? Because like we don't talk about that enough. But that's the purpose of having a government, right? And that's the purpose of having an economy. The purpose of an economy is to help enable people to have the things that they need and that they want.
Right.
That's it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Things that you need to live and things that you want. And
super important convo. And it's directly related to what you do. Like Zuck is often talking about these high level things in his CEO role, like in F8, when you listen to some of his speech, and you guys are literally at that level. You're building really important stuff that can change society, that can make or break it.
Yeah.
And
no, look, the purpose of Facebook, right? And now the other products that we have here, it's to bring people together, right? It's to give people, like, it's the mission. If you look up the mission of the company, it's right, basically to give people the tools to be closer to each other, right? That's where the VR stuff comes in as well, right? And the metaverse stuff. And the challenge is that bringing people closer together, there are some downsides to that, right? And so again, to me, the question is, well, what do we want? Because the technology can bring us together, but we want to make sure that that the outcomes of that are positive. And so the company does a lot of work. And I think one of the things that we're seeing from like Twitter, for example, is that moderating content at scale is very, very hard. And that I don't think that as imperfect as we are, right? And I think we all know that it could be perfect. It's not perfect, that it is a very hard, very thankless job, and one that is impossible to do perfectly because humans are imperfect, and language is imperfect. And so I think, again, to me, I'd rather the question be, what do we care the most? What do we care about? What
Right.
do we want the technology to help us do? And have that conversation, because that is
Right.
like a healthier, richer way to approach this stuff. And and
Yeah.
again, just in the same way that like I look at product as a human-centered, empathetic process, that is also the same process that it puts people and their needs
Mm.
first at the center of that, rather than sort of, again, as much as I love technology, what did I say at the beginning of the conversation? I cared about technology because of the way that it changed our lives,
Right.
not just because it's cool. I mean, I think it's cool too, but like, it's not just about the tech. It's about how is it going to change how we live? How is it going to change how we understand ourselves? How is it going to change how we relate to one another?
Yeah.
Those are the big, profound questions that I care about and I think
Yeah.
about every day.
Yeah. It's like reduce pain, increase pleasure, and possibly stimulate growth. And we have a lot of data. You have a lot of data, but even that data is hard to make sense of sometimes. And that's when conversation can also complement that. Peter,
Yeah.
it was a pleasure having you. I selfishly want a round two with you
Okay.
because
We'll make it happen.
that was just like the beginning of a nice convo. But where can people find out more about you?
So I haven't updated it in a while, but my personal website is just roj.as. And that's probably the easiest way. I should probably do an update post about like how to follow me on Threads and Mastodon,
All
which is
right.
the most these days. But
All right. Thank
yeah,
you.
roj.as.
Cool. I'm Charles Cormier, your host. That was a Product Wisdom podcast with Peter Rojas today, Rojas in English. Thank you so much, Peter.